Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm.
It's like wanting to get advice on longevity in leadership, but instead getting generic retirement tips while on a cruise ship.
It's certainly a different take on people who want to go places.
You wouldn't settle for just any marketing podcast, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. In 1995, a project manager at a San Francisco software company drove 12 miles into a Nevada dry lakebed because a man in a bedsheet holding a plastic flamingo told her to. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't going back to her old life.
Unbossing is a show about reinventing leadership in chaotic times. Each episode, we ask leaders in business and tech, what did you have to unlearn to succeed again? I'm Rishad Tobaccowala.
And I'm Drew Ianni. Today's guest is Marian Goodell, the first and only CEO of Burning Man Project. She's been at it since 1997 when she and 5 others founded the organization behind what has since become one of the most influential cultural gatherings in the world. 70,000 people, a city built in a week and dismantled in another, nearly 300 ambassadors in over 36 countries, 100+ regional events a year.
In 2018, her co-founder, Larry Harvey, died, leaving the organization without their chief philosophical officer. In 2023, torrential rain nearly broke the event. In 2024, for the first time in over a decade, the bird didn't sell out, and she had to lay off staff and ask a community for $20 million to keep the nonprofit alive. This year's HBO docuseries, The Man Will Burn, puts her at the center of the story.
Marian runs an organization whose guiding principles include decentralization, radical self-expression, and participation. Literally, no bosses. And yet she is the boss. This is a conversation about what it takes to lead such a unique organization. Let's get to our conversation with Marian Goodell.
So, Marian, thank you again very much for your time. And what I'd love our guests, in case they don't know Burning Man, for you to tell us a little bit about Burning Man.
Well, Burning Man is, for some people, known as a large event in the Nevada desert, but it's now also been really known as a culture because Burning Man events are happening around the world. But it was first on the radar because we build Black Rock City from scratch once a year for 8 days. And we don't have anything bought or sold except ice. And the whole intention of the environment is to be creative, self-expressive, to connect, not use your cell phone, not be on the internet, and just show up in reality in the middle of a desert.
And over the years, it has grown since you've been involved in it since 1995. So that's over 30 years now. Tell us a little bit about its growth.
Well, I first heard about Burning Man in 1992 when I was in a photography class at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. I was getting my master's in photography, and we saw these beautiful images of what was at the time just a man in the desert at the sunset. And I was really intrigued, and I was told that it was mostly about 300 people playing music and burning this figure. And over the years, it started doubling. I went in 96, and that's when I really wanted to become involved. I was trying to figure out, well, who are these crazy people that are bringing us into the desert to play? Because it really resonates to be in such a playful state where your defenses are down and your desire to connect with other people are prominent. And I thought, well, I really wanted to meet the people that did this. So I sought them out in late 1996, and it grew exponentially. We pretty much hit our peak in 2018 and 2019, around 78,000, close to 80,000.
Which is really interesting because here you were a project manager, I believe, for a software company at that time. And then you sort of reinvent yourself by quitting your job, your relationship, and you decide you're going to start a new life. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment or moments that made that occur?
Sure. I mean, that was a pretty transformative part of my life. When I left college, I worked in advertising in Boston, then I worked for a law firm. When I moved to California, I wanted to be in tech. At the time, that would have been in the early 90s. And I thought I wanted to learn technology, teach technology. And then I remember being a little depressed. And I have sisters that were getting an MBA and medical school and scientists. And I was like, fine, I'll go back to school. And while I was at the Academy of Art, I realized how I was really drawn to storytelling. I was really interested in photography. After I went to the Academy of Art, I went on to be part of this web environment. They were building websites, and that was the new big thing. And I was doing well at that. And that's where I was a project manager. And I went to Burning Man during that time period. And I realized how different it was to be back in the business world and to be project managing and looking to achieve that next thing as compared to going back to Burning Man, where I was encouraged to play and I was encouraged to interact with others. And there was nothing more than who you are and how you are going to be that you were judged on. I had enough money in my savings account and I said, well, I'll just quit for 3 months and I'll see what happens and help Burning Man at that point, which was struggling. We couldn't produce a growing event without us taking the time to invest in that growth.
Amazing.
So I took my entrepreneurial self and the part of me that was motivated to make things happen, and I just moved it on to something creative.
Was it a quick decision when they offered you the opportunity? You have to go think about it. And then I'd like to dig in a little bit on that transition, what you had to unlearn to do that job.
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, it was much more organic than that. I think for some of us in the world that have ended up doing really interesting things, it's far more interesting than filling out an application or somebody having a job description. I was dating the founder. And at the time, public relations started becoming a really big thing for Burning Man. In the fall of 1996, Wired magazine put Burning Man on the cover. I knew public relations from my work in the ad agency, and I was an English major, so I knew how to write and speak, and I just took in all of the requests for him. And then that turned into government relations, because if you're going to be helping present the story, then I started traveling with him and a couple of other people to public meetings. And I knew how to help frame the talking points for us to go in front of the room because the public was asking questions and they had never gone through this process before. And nobody asked me, honestly, Drew. I offered. I knew there was no money. I knew that if I wanted to contribute, just like you do in a startup, sometimes you come together and everybody just says, we're going to do whatever it is we need to do to do it together.
That's so amazing. When you talked about moving from a world of business to a world of what aligned with your passion, reminded me of a couple of things I tell my daughters, which is do not live in other people's minds and do not price yourself out of your dreams. One of them took me up on it and left Google and became a filmmaker.
Fabulous. It's my father also that encouraged me.
Amazing.
Yeah, the same father who encouraged me to achieve whatever I needed to do and to seek whatever it was in the world when I found myself at an end, which was, looking for the money and the sales and being the top dog. He's the one who said, I'll help you step in the direction if there's something that would make you happier.
Oh, that's exactly what we did. And now I tell my daughter when she builds her estate somewhere in Beverly Hills, she can have a cottage for dad and mom, which is exactly correct. I'll hand it over to Drew, who'll probably ask you about your being named CEO.
I'm born and raised in the Bay Area where I am now, and Wired was my Bible, of course, and you knew what Wired was, and you knew the impact of being on the cover of Wired. I'm curious, at that moment, you knew, and your partner maybe was realizing, and other people around Burning Man knew what that meant. What were you thinking at that moment in terms of this is really going to grow and scale Burning Man, whether we want it to scale or not, or scale in the way that you want? Did you have conversations around how do we preserve the value, the spirit, the mission of Burning Man when you well knew that after that cover story, it was going to go to another level? It was certainly going to be more, quote unquote, popular. And I'm just curious about that moment in those discussions post the Wired cover story.
I think it's been an internal dialogue more or less with the people that attend Burning Man than it is for those of us that help bring it to life.
Yeah.
You know, right now there's a film out, The Man Will Burn, and there is really a community dialogue around, will this hurt Burning Man? And the exact same conversation was out in 1996 when Wired magazine did their cover story. You know, the artists and the sort of underground cool was coming to Burning Man, very much West Coast, scattered across the US. People were making the trek, and a little bit from Europe. And it was a fear that someone was going to ruin Burning Man. And we talk a lot still about maintaining a focus on the importance of the culture. In the best terms, what Burning Man is intended to do is provide anybody from any walk of life the access to a really creative way to really be in a place that gets you in touch with yourself, challenges you with weather, living environment, challenges you around leadership if you're living in a camp. But just like any other endeavor, you want to scale something carefully. You want to scale it if you care about the culture and not the income. And in our case, we cared about the culture. Then you set up things to maintain the culture, to hold the culture as the first part of your decision making. That's been a primary part of how we're operating.
And in that transition to CEO in 2013, taking over from Larry, you know, we're unbossing here, and it's about unlearning and unbossing. And what did you have to sort of unlearn to jump into that role and do it successfully?
I love that question, Drew. I truly do. Because I think about actually my unbossing probably started in the very beginning when I first joined the group. Larry was the leader in that he had the source of the cultural intentions. He wasn't an operational person. He kind of knew what he did or didn't like. And those of us around him enjoyed and brought to the table our own ideas and theories, but the core of it was his. So I believe that what I brought initially to Burning Man was a very stubborn, willful way of seeing things. And I think initially that's certainly what attracted Larry to me was confidence, but the others bristled and made it clear that my leadership style, though it might work in the way that I was building departments, it didn't work in the collective. And I thought, well, I realized in a way that they were giving me the insight that to be a better leader, I needed to be also a better listener. Instead of my way or the highway or Dad's way or Marian's way, I knew that my ideas might come through others also. And if I just was quiet and I was the last person to speak, or I wasn't the first person to speak, or I didn't tell everybody this is what it should be and then make them follow, but I asked, what should it be? And that process was way more interesting.
So Larry was the visionary and kind of maybe the free spirit and the artist, and you were the ops. So when you became CEO, maybe through some of those conversations with your co-founders, did you say, I need a strong number two or a small team when you thought about building out your team that is sort of the yin to your yang? And okay, I'm this way, and even though I'm evolving, I might need that complement that I was to Larry. How did you think about building your team out?
Because we were in a collective environment and we actually had a collective goal and we all believed that whatever it was we wanted really was more about something bigger than ourselves, we went through a facilitated process and we went through a year's worth of facilitation. And I was not going to tell anybody what I was going to do. I was genuinely in service. I figured I had shown up in ways that would set me up for leadership. And we had a session where the other founders with the facilitator decided that I was going to run things. The hard part, Drew, was that these are now my collaborators. How do you go from being a collaborative leader into a structure of a nonprofit that has now grown to $68 million budget at the time? And how do I use the same principles of what I was using before, which is I need to get out in front and I need to take definitive leadership. But how do I do that in the context of where I am? Because the risks are now higher. Nonprofit, laws and regulations and board members made the stakes a lot higher. And it took years. Like I had no team, Drew. There was no chief operating officer originally. We had a head of finance, not a CFO. Those things all came over time when the complexity of what we were doing clearly was more than our group could handle or the team members that we'd had in place for a much smaller organization. And frankly, the timing was exactly when it had to happen. In order to grow, often you have to have those moments to reflect that the capacity, your team members' capacity are not what they need to be in order to go that next level. So, but our CFO, our rock star CFO right now, we only got him 3 years ago. We also had to make enough money, Drew, to attract real talent. And that took time.
And by the way, I also am the son of a conservative Catholic father, so I fully understand and identify.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
As you have somewhat alluded to, had to go from being the number 2 to the number 1 in a place where there's no hierarchy, but someone who is a little more equal than all other equal people.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the adjustments and additional things you mentioned that you got wrong before you got right? Because a lot of this podcast is about learning and unlearning. And I'm sure you had to learn and unlearn things.
Well, the hardest part was up to the point that he passed away because I couldn't really take full authority of what I needed to do. I still loved referring and deferring to him, but he wasn't a businessman and he liked to spend money on art. And when money was tight, the first thing we get rid of is not art at Burning Man. When he had a stroke, I was in France and I remember taking a train. I was on my way to an event of our leaders in Europe. And I remember thinking my life will forever be different. It just changed. I was happy running the operations and having him be the head storyteller. I thought that was sort of a perfect poetic place to be, except when it came in around the conflict of managing money. When I first ended up in the position, honestly, I think I'd used everything that I knew how to get through it, Rishad. A founder passing away created a sense of instability in the organization, in the board, in the community. What's going to happen next? The more of the unlearning came as we headed into the pandemic, which was only 2 years after Larry passed away. So I felt like I'd been in training. The pandemic was the place where the command and control was even more important. Okay. The reverse of what you would think is true, where we're in a collective. I make sure everybody's included. Larry, what do you think? We have got board, we have staff, we have community. Like the decisions take forever in those environments, but they're necessary because Burning Man's cultural. When we got to the pandemic, my leadership was super tested because now I have to make decisions. We have only $10 million in the bank. We're going to get a PPP loan. We're going to get donations from the community. And what are we going to do with that money? What we did with the money up to that point had been defined and was a routine. What we're going to do to it and how we're going to shrink and how we're going to reallocate people. There's not a lot of time for collaboration on that. There's not going to be a lot of meetings about that. So I feel like I went from a command control kind of person to a collective kind of person. And then I was in the middle. When Larry passed away, I'm like, okay, I can be a collective command and control kind of person. But when the pandemic came, there's no collective time. That's command and control. So my pivots have continued.
Absolutely. We can sort of see it and sense it. And I would say you've obviously had many pivot points, but 2020, 2021, where you had to cancel the burn, were the big ones. And to a great extent, in addition to obviously the decision making, as you say, which had to be a command and control decision, you had to go over some of your board members, and then you had to watch some renegades hold a renegade burn. So they actually took your learnings about radical self-expression and participation and ran with it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That era, that time was fascinating. 2020 was for sure the most stressful piece, but I knew we'd get through it. 2021 was harder for different reasons because as we were coming out of the pandemic slowly, the opinions were really at all extremes, even in my own organization, in the community, and on the board. I thought that decision-making process was fascinating. I knew I needed to listen until the decision became clear. And I also watched the growth online of people that were certain that if I canceled the event and if the organization and the board canceled the event, that they were still going to go to the site. And it was kind of a secret, weird dream that we'd had for a long time, because in early years when we were engaging with the Bureau of Land Management, it's actually a negotiating point to know that the community is going to go there anyway. So it put the government into a position of negotiating with us. And it felt like the perfect answer. Like organizationally, we couldn't do the event. We couldn't really complete it, even under financially with people, like the logistics. It just didn't make sense. But we had built a culture and we're nurturing a culture that is intended to teach people radical self-reliance and communal effort and to do it in any environment. So I went to the Renegade Burn. I wanted to see the outcome of what we knew was going to be true. It was that Burning Man culture sets people up to create large communal opportunity and engage safely with one another and look out for one another. And you don't really have to have the organization there. You do to scale. That one was about 12,000 people, and there's no way it could have been much bigger than that without real leadership, without centralized leadership.
Yeah, because I love when I'd either forgot or wasn't aware that there was the Renegade that people went anyway, and I didn't know it was 12,000. That's quite a few Renegades. I love that story. And this just sort of came to me as we were talking, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on leadership and where the command and control was necessary during the pandemic, or even with the rain. I mean, those were situations that were they were crises, but they were fundamentally out of your control. You didn't have anything to do with the pandemic. You didn't have anything to do with the storms. Do you think that there's a difference? Did it help that you were responding to crises that were not of your making? And I'm wondering if there's sort of a leadership moment and there's a difference when, maybe it is not of your making versus a crisis that might be of your making. Not that there's a history of that, but I'm just wondering if it helped a little bit that, well, we weren't responsible for these things happening and we have to make these decisions.
That's a fair way to look at it. And from where I've experienced with Burning Man, the command and control should be used sparingly if what you're aiming for is an experience that other people want to contribute to. They want to lean in and they want to participate. And that's the whole point of Burning Man. When I have the opportunity to use collaborative decision-making, and that's different from consensus, taking input from your stakeholders. And you're in the middle of a crisis. Your job is to sail the boat out of the storm. You have to take the tiller and learn how to request the movement of the others that are there to help you sail the ship. And I would say there were some hard learnings for me even in 20 and 21 with that, where you're in a culture at an organization where everybody's kind of accustomed to checking in and we have a meeting and we all give our things. And if I'm barking orders on Zoom and we're accustomed to being in person, that was a huge piece. By the end of 2020, I had some people telling me that you're quite a bitch. And I remember kind of feeling like, well, I kind of had to be in order to get us through to the point. But I also took 2021 and worked hard to think through, how can I do my best by being in the middle of a crisis, but also maintaining the generosity of spirit that I think we really look for in our culture and what we want in a leader at Burning Man.
Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm.
It's like wanting to hear my take on unbossing and getting my advice on being bossy instead.
Let me tell you what I think again.
Hierarchy over ideas.
Figure it out.
Okay. You wouldn't settle for any advice on leadership in today's business world, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
I latch onto quotes when I hear something, and I love collaborative decision-making is different from consensus, because we have a lot of, leaders and aspiring leaders that listen to this podcast. Can you explain that a little bit and explain that difference?
I think it's a really important difference. When we first started with the 6 of us, it was just us. We were the only employees. There were other people that were temporary employees, but we were the first regular employees. And we decided that we were going to reach everything by consensus. And with 6 people, it's more or less possible to do that, except for some, minor activities that you have that are yours. But this included things like signing checks.
Right.
There were 6 of us that were check signers, which is absurd.
Yeah, wow.
And then we started adding some people to our senior leadership team, and they were really excited that we were a consensus-based organization. We realized very early on that consensus works at a particular size, but after that, it's not really effective. It just takes forever. We needed to move things forward. And we weren't living in a communal environment. We were creating an activity that was producing a cultural experience, and we needed to redefine it. Collaborative decision-making does involve knowing who your stakeholders are. And in our case, as we're building into the future, I've helped us architect systems in the organization so that people can learn how to choose your stakeholders. You might have one lead stakeholder, 3 primary stakeholders, and you might have 8 people giving input. Teaching those major stakeholders how to work together and how to listen to the others, and then they're the ones that will make the decision. Or you have your meta decision makers, what we call it. Everybody should be fine because you see yourself in that process. And sometimes that process has to go quickly. You have one meeting, you have one Zoom meeting, everybody's there, and then the stakeholders confer, and the meta decision maker, listen, if I'm doing a good job, Drew, I don't have to make the decision. It happens in front of me. In my world of collective leadership.
There's another quote.
So now we're sort of thinking about 2024, and now you come to another crossroads, which is for the first time you don't sell out. What happens then?
Well, 2024 is very complicated, actually. What really happened was that our ticket model, our budgeting ticket model, changed overnight. From 2022 and 2023, we had these high dollar tickets and we sold them first. So if you had the means and you were anxious to go to Burning Man, you bought them first. We sold 1,000 at $2,500. In 2023, we sold 1,000 of them immediately, like 36 hours. We sold 100 of them the next year. So in your marketing speak, which we rarely use at Burning Man, but in your marketing speak, our market just changed. Our high dollar buyers decided that they didn't really need to buy right away because in 2023, the participant base shrank slightly. So there were tickets available on the market in September that year or in August, right before Burning Man. If we've always had tickets and they were tight to get, they would move around. You eventually got in 2023, if those that wanted to go and those that had tickets changed and there were more tickets sitting in people's hands on the market, our model for 2024 should have changed more than it did. We did not see or realize to what degree that was going to switch. It put us in a position where the nonprofit arm of how we operate has always been primary. But through the pandemic, we first saw the capacity of the community to contribute. So 2024 meant for the survival of the event, if we aren't going to sell tickets, we need to lean into philanthropy.
It seems to be that you, every year or two, face a twist or turn, and you have had more twists and turns in your career and in your life that would make, I guess, lesser people take to drink or, I guess, go to Burning Man. But since you're already there, I guess, you can't do that. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've sort of changed over this and what some of your learnings are for people? Broadly, because we've asked you chapter by chapter, but now it's sort of the Burning Man story or Marian at Burning Man. It's the Marian story.
I feel so fortunate to have had this opportunity. It's been an absolutely fascinating journey to come into Burning Man and look for the chance to help and approach it in one way. And then my leadership opportunity pushes me to approach it a new way. And then my leadership is called upon at even a higher level. And I have to balance the ways in which I am. Where I have come is the right place where I am in my life, in that Burning Man has matured, but so has Marian. And the future for Burning Man and for Marian all relate to how I set up the organization so that it can continue on without my leadership. And at this point, it's not all about Marian. It is all about how does the organization want to function? Does it want to be a top-down? Does it want to be distributed? Does it want to be a hybrid of top-down distributed, which is what I think I've been trying to create? And how do you set that up so that people don't just default? I think it's really one of the more interesting things to learn about people in leadership is I thought everybody wanted to run things and be in charge. So I was always kind of initially like figuring out, how do you put all the people that want to run things and be in charge into a room and you put them in the right place? But I realized that there's really great balance in how people want to show up and they want to be in service and they're happy being number two and they're happy being on the support team. So the most interesting pieces came out of 24, Rishad, where in the force of great pressure to land that last part of the plane, looking around and recognizing the abilities and talent of the people around me and trusting in the pressure of that moment to continue to give and push things towards them as they asked for them, as they wanted to solve them, to get through difficult moments like that and watch us succeed because we succeeded. We made 2025, made a profit. We can say that the organization now has its own DNA for how we operate, and it doesn't have to all be about me.
I'm very curious, maybe the last few years, and this is our 9th episode, and we blissfully have not mentioned AI in the entire episode, which I'd find absolutely wonderful. Tell me about the younger generations coming to Burning Man and where you think they're going to take it as you look ahead. What are they talking about? I'm sure AI probably in a way helps you because there's just more of a demand and more interest in real life experiences and community, right? There is this sort of analog pushback, which I actually really love. But tell me about the younger people coming to Burning Man and where you think they might help you take it.
There's a super cool next generation of people that are discovering Burning Man. We have a program that kind of rose up out of our own leadership in the organization. A young lady came in 2022, had never been to Burning Man, named Taylor. And she went and she came as an intern. And at the end of it, she's like, where are my people? And I said, I'll fund you for a year of the internship if you help me figure that out. And she turned it into a program. It's the Rising Sparks program that she created. It's a collective of individuals that she just started literally gathering them for Instagram and putting them on WhatsApp groups. And then after 2024, gathered the group together. And she said, what do we find? What do we know? And what they all said was that they loved that Burning Man was intergenerational. And they appreciated that they were welcome at the table, which is the way that we function culturally at Burning Man. And that momentum has gotten them to do the work and to build their Instagram following and to do events in person in New York, in Reno, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles. And they're the ones in charge of how they want to tell the story because they can tell the story better than I can. And it also taught me that we have biases. We've done the bias training. I think we had biases towards people under a particular age. But I found Burning Man when I was in my late 20s. How the heck are we allowing ourselves to be leaders that are in our 40s and 50s and accidentally looking for 35-year-olds when really sharp kids are coming out into the world, really ambitious, really want connectivity, very clever, very creative. So looking for people to be on our staff, looking for artists, encouraging their voices, interviewing, making sure we're interviewing everybody that looks like a fresh face, even if it looks like they're not experienced enough, but the way they tell their story, bring them in because sometimes there's another role for them. I'm just really happy. My 21-year-old niece is coming with me to Burning Man this year, and she's all jazzed. She's done all the homework. She's prepared. She doesn't sit on her phone all the time. She puts it down. She wants to play. So I have a lot of hope, Drew, in this next generation, and I really love the young people that are coming to Burning Man. And also, people don't realize this because we've been around long enough, The burners that had kids, the kids are now coming.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if the kids are coming now of the original burners. Yeah.
And they're breaking away from their parents. They're like, we want our own camps. Now, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's very
really cool.
It's an amazing legacy in the fact that from where you started to where you've ended, but more importantly, that how Burning Man has evolved. And the two words that you keep bringing out, which I think are very important today, is culture and community.
Mm-hmm.
You keep referring to culture and community, and in many ways, culture and community are very critical. And in today's world where people are looking for things that are real, Burning Man is so unreal that it's real.
It's unreal and it's surreal. It's unreal, it's
surreal.
real, and it's surreal.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I think people don't realize that it really started on a beach in San Francisco, and it was an artistic act. It was an act of creativity and grieving, and it moved to the desert because it wasn't practical to be on the beach, and everything was related to practicality. There was no deliberate list of things to do. It was playful. It was sort of theatrical. It was very much communal. It's dark. You need to leave a light on in the middle of a desert so other cars can find you. And then the next year you need to assign a person to leave the light on so the other cars can find you. You need to create a gate and a fence. And all of it was very, very organic. And through all of that, you're right. Community and culture are the things that we lean into because they're really the things that were the very root of it naturally without us calling it that. And those are the things that felt good. And those are the things that worked. And that was what was worth protecting.
I'm going to send you a clip from John Cleese, the comedian, actually, who was speaking 20 years ago in front of a bunch of creative people. And he talked about the importance of play in a sort of a business and creativity context. So it must give you great satisfaction that, look, everyone comes and then they leave and they go back to their worlds. They go back to their professional worlds in many cases. And I'm sure it must give you great satisfaction that this helps them in their professional lives as well. It helps them learn how to play. And that's very, very important as they go back to their professional lives as well as their personal lives.
Yeah, I do a lot of speaking. I've done speaking all over the world, and it's sometimes marketing conferences, which is always quite interesting. I've spoken to banks and businesses, a large conference in Switzerland. And when the guy came to me to talk to me, and he'd never been to Burning Man, and said, I want you to come speak to this business conference. I said, are you sure you know what you're doing? He said, I do. He said, everything I've read indicates that you're creating better people. You're creating better people, which are better employees. And that means you're also creating better leaders. And he said, I want to tell the story about how if you're looking at business in a stiff way, that you're going to improve your companies if you look at your people in a different way and allow them to be creative. And if you're at Burning Man, it reconnects with a very intrinsic part of life and love of other humans. It just allows you to be vulnerable and intimate and human and real. And it really works that touches something that's honest. And when you go back into the world, you want to hang on to it. And I think that's why some people change their relationships, they change their jobs, they build companies, because this gives you a sense of self-confidence about yourself. So we're super happy that people from all walks of life come to Burning Man, and they are now producing their own events. There is an event of 10,000 people in South Africa. We don't own it. It's not a franchise. But people now in Europe that can't get all the way to San Francisco and to the northern Nevada desert, they call it Africa Burn.
Amazing.
And there's events in Germany, in Japan. Like, it's all over the world. I think the idea of unbossing is very important for leaders to consider when they are imagining how to create a strong and interesting and dynamic company in today's world. The theories that my father would have learned at Harvard Business School are very important, I think, to run a well-structured, well-run organization. So if there's anything about unbossing that people really can learn to do, it's ask yourself, how would you want to be a member of the staff? How would you want to be led? And to also be ready to pivot.
Absolutely.
If you're in an organization, the culture's not working, your job is to think that through, is how do you want to pivot?
Yes. It's sort of letting go and changing and things like that.
Oh, and the last thing, Rishad,
Sure,
is self-reflection. It's really hard to be a strong leader and also understand that self-reflection is a key part of a successful organization. And it doesn't mean you have to be vulnerable and you stand in front of everybody and tell all your deepest, darkest secrets. But it does mean that when you receive feedback and you need to create opportunities for feedback from people you trust, you actually have to own And that's super hard to do if you were raised in a certain way or you went to business school and they taught you how to make decisions. Today's generation and today's world asks us to be ready for feedback and to be able to listen and be self-reflective.
That is absolutely correct. So I have one more last question. What are you now focusing on unlearning, or what do you think you're going to have to unlearn?
Well, I'm definitely in the process of unlearning the rigors of leadership in a large organization. There are forms and formats and formulas and ways in which you have to watch everything you say, be very careful in how you tell the story, use all of your best language to help employees recognize where they've reached a point of change and moving on. How do you negotiate things? In order to explore other things that interest me, and I love film, it's an area that I wanted to pursue when I went to photography school, and I love being creative, there's a real part of me that has to rethink my own assumptions. I don't have to have all the answers. I get to explore. That is the whole point. So I'm spending time unlearning the requirements of having felt that I needed to be in service and that I needed to perform in ways that other people were expecting me to. And I'm looking for opportunities where I can actually return to my authentic self and find the room to play, Rishad. I need to play.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you, Marian, for your time. This is fantastic.
Thank you, Marian.
Thank you so much, both of you.
So, Drew, I think that was a fantastic episode. And Marian is a living testament to unbossing and unlearning. While we heard from her about how she had to evolve. And I think one of the big learnings is a different style for a different season sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So she comes in as a command and control project manager, learns to sort of let go and basically say this is going to be about collaborative and community. Then decides that's not completely her. So she combines the two, which is the collaborative and community is more her partner. She's more of the command and control, and they manage between the two. And then she discovers things like COVID, where fuzzy community is going to go nowhere but out of business. So she has to go back to command and control. And then she evolves further into the new way.
I mean, there's so much that I took away. I wrote down so many notes. Obviously, I'll come back to the importance of play. But to go back to your sort of command and control and structure and organization and leading of our own life experiences and all the experiences we've had with these interviews, Burning Man is no different than any other organization, even though it might be more decentralized and it's certainly not corporate. And I'm sure the people that go there believe that, you're living on the edge of anarchy. But as she said, anarchy is not good. And every organization, even decentralized organizations, need good leadership. And those leaders need to unlearn and unboss as well. It's universal because, to your point, organizations don't change, people do. All these organizations, whether it's big corporate America or a decentralized thing like Burning Man, they're led by people. And Burning Man is made up of 70, 60, 70, 80,000 people. So it's people leading people no matter what the organization.
She mentioned at the end about how important the concept of unbossing was, that the rules that were taught at Harvard Business School,
right,
the rules that apply less and less to most organizations. In fact, the organizations that apply the rules tend to go out of business if they just apply those rules,
right,
which is a big thing. And the original rules of Burning Man seem to be the new rules of business. Which is,
right. Yeah.
We go from zones of control to zones of influence. We go from all learning, or rather all knowing, to all learning. She talked about the importance of self-reflection, which basically says, what do I have right or what do I have not right? And everybody wants to have a voice, and this is a participative. So in many ways, the community, radical self-expression and participation combined with empathy and self-reflection is unbossing. So who knows? Unbossing was invented at Burning Man.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. And also, I fully agree with all of that. And you've written so much about it in terms of how leaders need to evolve for these times. But I also do find it interesting. And I think part of that evolution is always finding the balance between sort of this new way of leading, if you will.
Yeah.
But also, she definitely, when she needed to, pulled in the lessons from her Harvard Business School father.
Oh, yeah.
And
Exactly.
command and control and those types of older school types of command and control types of approaches, or, sometimes you need it. And I'm sure even if she was doing it subconsciously or semi-consciously, was pulling in those learnings from her father and sort of that ops person that came up through the ranks, if you will.
And one of the things that you reinforce, building on your point about learning from her father and her ops operation, is potentially a big part of leadership is it's an art. And we talked about art at Burning Man and the importance of art, but leadership is an art. And the best leaders have a palette with which they paint with. And depending on the situation they face, they go to bolder colors when they have to be under threat, and maybe more pastel colors at a different time, or similarly, different colors for different folks. But it's really an art of understanding the situation and understanding the people you're trying to motivate and using what's in your color palette and your brushes versus a one-way-fits-all model.
Well, if we're going to continue to beat the art metaphor to death here a little bit, I mean, I think, given where we are in these times, like everything's a Jackson Pollock right now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that. There's your leadership metaphor. I really do love and I think leaders should take it to heart and really think about it. Collaborative decision-making is different from consensus. I really like that. I think it's a subtle sort of distinction, but very important.
Perfect.
That's it for today's episode. If our conversation with Marian got you thinking about the version of yourself you might need to let go of before the next chapter is possible, take a moment to leave us a rating and a review. It helps more people find these conversations.
Follow Unbossing on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're not already subscribed, this is a good time to start. We have more conversations like this, one coming up this season that you won't want to miss.
The world is asking all of us to unlearn something. The question is whether we're brave enough to actually do it. I'm Drew Ianni.
And I'm Rishad Tobaccowala, and this was Unbossing. See you next time.
Unbossing is a Bubbler Media iHeart podcast production. If you're not in the conversation, you're not in the game.
Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm.
It's like wanting to get advice on longevity in leadership, but instead getting generic retirement tips while on a cruise ship.
It's certainly a different take on people who want to go places.
You wouldn't settle for just any marketing podcast, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.